All right, let's dive into something that might feel a little uncomfortable, but it's also something that's at the very core of what makes us human. We're going to talk about our own incredible and, yeah, sometimes infuriating inconsistency.
So let me just ask you this, straight up. Just think about it for a second. Do your actions always line up with what you say you believe in, your deepest values? If you're anything like me, or pretty much any other human on the planet, the honest answer is probably a pretty complicated no.
And look, we're not talking about small slip-ups here. This gap between what we say and what we actually do can be absolutely massive. We talk about the sanctity of life, but then we'll happily binge-watch a show where people get knocked off for entertainment. We say environmentalism is crucial, but our closets and travel plans, well, they might tell a very different story. We believe in equality for all, but research shows we almost always favor our own little group. So, what on earth is going on here?
Well, the first thing to get your head around is that this isn't some bug in our programming. It's actually a core feature. See, we have this idea that we're rational beings who sometimes make mistakes. But the truth is, we're rationalizing beings. We do what we do based on gut feelings, habits, and desires. And then our brilliant brains get to work cooking up a perfectly logical reason for why we did it.
And what's really fascinating is that those values we state so proudly, they often aren't the instruction manual for our choices. Think of them more like identity badges. There's signals we send to everyone else, and even to ourselves, about the kind of person we want to be. They are our aspirations, not some kind of algorithm that runs our life.
So if we're all walking around with this giant gap between our ideals and our reality, you'd think our brains would just short-circuit, right? Well, it turns out we have some incredibly powerful psychological machinery running totally in the background that lets us live with these contradictions without having a complete meltdown.
A huge piece of this puzzle comes from the legendary psychologist Albert Bandura. He came up with this idea called moral disengagement, and it's basically what it sounds like. It's the mind's uncanny ability to just flip a switch and turn off our moral code. It's a whole process that lets us convince ourselves that, for this one thing, in this specific situation, the usual rules just don't apply.
And Bandura even identified the specific levers our brains pull to make this happen. For instance, we use something called euphemistic labeling, saying harvesting instead of killing to make it sound cleaner. Or how about diffusion of responsibility? That's the classic, hey, everyone else is doing it, so the blame gets spread so thin nobody feels it. Then there's advantageous comparison, where we make what we're doing seem not so bad by pointing to someone else who's doing something way worse. These aren't just lame excuses. They're incredibly effective psychological tools.
But wait, it gets even deeper. It's not just that we have these little mental tricks. We actually build entire systems around ourselves to protect us from even seeing our own contradictions. We have these systematic, often unconscious strategies for just looking away.
Think about it. First, we filter. We build our own little information bubbles on social media so that everything we see tells us we're the good guys. Then we reframe the story to make ourselves look better. After that, we buffer. We hang out with people who share our exact same blind spots, which makes it all feel totally normal. And finally, we make things abstract. We use jargon and statistics talking about collateral damage instead of dead civilians to keep our own empathy from kicking in too hard.
Okay, so I know what you might be thinking right now. This all sounds pretty terrible, right? It sounds like a laundry list of our moral failures. But here comes the biggest plot twist in this whole story. What if this so-called flaw isn't a flaw at all? What if it's actually a psychological survival tool?
Just take a moment and really honestly try to imagine this. What if you genuinely felt the full emotional weight of all the suffering in the world? Every single bit of it. You wouldn't be able to get out of bed. You'd be completely paralyzed. Our ability to feel for others is powerful, but it's not infinite. Our brains literally evolved with a built-in filter for distant suffering. It's an adaptation that helped us survive. We have to build these mental firewalls, because if we let everything in, we'd be so overwhelmed we couldn't do anything for anyone. So in a strange way, our inconsistency is what allows us to function at all. So here's the big takeaway. Let's just toss out the old myth right now. We're taught that being inconsistent is some kind of personal moral failure, that it makes you a hypocrite. But the psychological reality? It's a necessary survival mechanism. It's how a brain with limited capacity copes with a world of infinite complexity and pain. Okay, so where does that leave us? If we can't get rid of our hypocrisy, are we just off the hook? Not at all. The goal just changes. It's not about achieving some impossible state of moral purity. It's about something way more attainable and, honestly, more interesting. It's about practicing honesty. So let's look at a few practical ways to live more consciously with our contradictions. First, pick your battleground. You can't fix everything at once. Just choose one area, one gap between your values and actions that really, truly bothers you. Second, try practicing what you might call the inverse Samaritan. Instead of rushing out to help, learn how to just stand still and listen when someone tells you how your group, your side has hurt them, and do it without getting defensive. Third, shrink just one gap. Take one small, concrete action that actually costs you a little something, time, money, comfort, and do it without expecting a pat on the back. And finally, curate your attention. Deciding what you give your focus to is one of the most powerful choices you have. And through all of this, just remember, the real goal here isn't to become perfectly consistent. That's a fantasy. The real grown-up work is to just stop pretending the gap doesn't exist. It's about being willing to see it, to acknowledge the discomfort, and maybe, every once in a while, to do something about it.
And that kind of brings us to this final idea. Maybe we've got it all wrong about what integrity is. Maybe it's not some polished, perfect thing. Maybe real integrity is messier. Maybe it's just about having the courage to be seen in the middle of a contradiction, to hold those fractured parts of yourself without rushing to pretend you're whole, and to choose, just once in a while, not to look away.
Imagine you wake up one morning, you walk into your bathroom, and you look in the mirror.
Okay.
But instead of seeing one solid, continuous reflection staring back at you, you see a dozen different versions of yourself.
Oh, wow. That is a jarring image.
Right. And the wild part is, they are all acting completely differently depending on who is in the room with them or, what they're being asked to do.
Right, like totally different people.
Exactly. One version of you is fiercely defending this deeply held moral belief, while right next to it, another version of you is quietly doing the exact opposite just because, I don't know, it's a Tuesday and you're tired.
Yeah, the Tuesday excuse. We all know that one.
We really do. But according to the multi-layered document we are exploring in today's deep dive, that fragmented mirror is actually a perfectly accurate picture of human psychology. We are, by our very nature, walking contradictions.
We really are. And I should mention, the text we're unpacking today is an absolute minefield.
Oh, yeah. It really goes there.
It does. It uses highly sensitive, politically charged examples like abortion, capital punishment, climate change, and, religious dogma to make its points.
Yeah, and just to set the ground rules for you listening right now, we are not here to take a political side on any of these issues.
No, not at all.
Nor are we endorsing any specific religious viewpoints. We are treating these topics strictly as the source text does, which is basically as mirrors to look at our own psychological blind spots. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's do it. So to understand the engine of this contradiction, we first have to, look at the exhaust.
Okay, the exhaust. I like that.
Right, because the mission of this deep dive isn't just to gawk at our inconsistencies. It's to uncover the underlying mechanisms of self-deception, the systems that actually profit from our blind spots, and how you can practically manage your own moral gaps.
Which is so needed, honestly.
It really is. And the source text gives us these incredibly stark contrasts in our everyday lives. It points out the glaring gaps between our grand rhetoric and our actual reality. Take the concept of the sanctity of life.
Right.
As a society, we universally preach that human life is the ultimate untouchable value.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yet simultaneously, we consume highly realistic, fictional murder scenes in movies and video games purely for entertainment.
Oh, that's true.
And we tolerate the mechanical killing of billions of sentient non-human animals in factory farms through what the text calls motivated ignorance.
Motivated ignorance.
Yeah, and we even routinely turn a blind eye to real-world genocides. The rhetoric says life is sacred, but the behavior tells a completely different story.
It's like a total disconnect. And you see the same disconnect when it comes to religion, too. The sources highlight how people will claim their religious doctrine is absolute, undeniable truth, the very foundation of the universe.
Right, like the ultimate reality.
Exactly. But then they operate as what the text calls Sunday morning Christians.
Oh, yeah. That's a great phrase for it.
Monday through Saturday, their financial decisions, their gossip, their cutthroat business tactics, they're totally indistinguishable from someone who holds no religious beliefs whatsoever.
Totally. Or they'll just, pragmatically switch religions.
Right. Someone might change their core spiritual identity just to marry a specific person, or close a business deal, or assimilate into a new neighborhood.
It becomes a social tool. And the text even introduces this fascinating term called seminary syndrome.
Oh, yeah. Explain that one, because I found that fascinating.
It is such a brilliant distillation of the problem. Seminary syndrome describes the phenomenon where people actually lose their faith precisely because they dedicate their lives to critically studying it.
Wait, really?
Yeah. When the belief system is held at a distance, it remains sacred. But the moment it is subjected to rigorous academic scrutiny, when the historical texts and all the contradictions are laid bare, the magic often just dissipates.
So we prefer absolute truths to remain, like, slightly out of focus.
Exactly. It's safer that way.
And it bleeds into our secular values, too. I mean, we champion the idea of free will, right? We hold people strictly accountable for their choices, insisting that anyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Right, the classic meritocracy narrative.
The moment we personally fail at something,
Oh, suddenly we are hardcore determinists.
yes, we blame our genetics, our upbringing, a bad economy, or just, having a really bad day. We praise meritocracy loudly, yet quietly pass down inherited wealth and use nepotism networks for our kids.
It's so true.
And we declare this deep existential concern for climate change, but we don't stop flying across the country for vacations. And we keep buying fast fashion because it's just cheap and convenient.
Right, because it's easy.
It's like we treat our stated values like a massive buffet. We loudly announce to everyone in the restaurant that we are on this strict, highly principled diet, but practically speaking, we just load up our plates with whatever is comforting, easy, or advantageous in the moment.
The buffet analogy is perfect.
But is this just humans being blatant hypocrites, or is something, I don't know, structural happening under the hood?
Well, the assumption that this is just malicious hypocrisy is actually where most analysis falls short. We have to move from the surface behavior down to the psychological engine room. The text introduces several mechanisms that make this buffet mentality possible, and a foundational one is psychologist Alvar Bander's concept of moral disengagement.
Moral disengagement.
Yeah. These are basically cognitive levers we pull to selectively turn off our morality. It prevents us from feeling the psychological weight of our actions.
Oh, euphemistic labeling comes to mind immediately here.
Yes, exactly. Give me an example.
Like, we don't say we are killing an animal. The industry calls it processing.
Right, processing.
Or a military strike doesn't result in dead civilians. It results in collateral damage. The language itself is a buffer. It sanitizes the reality.
It does. And there's also the diffusion of responsibility.
Oh, like the classic, well, everyone eats meat, so my one hamburger doesn't make a difference.
Exactly. Or every corporation pollutes, so my fast fashion habit is statistically irrelevant. We instantly dilute our own agency, so the moral math always works out in our favor.
That dilution is incredibly effective.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's compounded by another framework the text explores, which Jonathan Haidt calls moral compartmentalization.
Right. I loved this part.
Haidt argues that we possess entirely different moral operating systems, and we switch between them seamlessly depending on the context.
Like switching apps on a phone.
Basically, yeah.
Huh.
Let's look at the abortion debate versus a geopolitical conflict. In an abortion debate, a person might lean heavily on the CARE Foundation, arguing fiercely for the sanctity of a vulnerable life.
Right.
But take that exact same person and place them in a discussion about a tribal or national conflict, and they might instantly switch to the Loyalty Foundation.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly, the lives of their specific group matter significantly more than the universal concept of care. The sanctity of life becomes highly conditional based on which moral framework is currently active.
It's like a corporation that has different departments operating under the same roof with completely contradictory metrics for success.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
Like, the HR department is running the care software, focusing on well-being and equity, while the sales department is running the loyalty and conquest software, focusing purely on crushing the competition.
Yep.
They are the same company, but depending on which department you ask, the core values are totally opposed. But why is our brain structured like this corporate mess? I mean, why did we evolve to operate with such friction?
This raises an important question about existential necessity. Humans have a finite empathy budget.
An empathy buzz.
Right. The text makes this profound observation. If you are perfectly consistent, if you truly viscerally felt the suffering of every factory-farmed animal, every starving child, every victim of war, little breakdown.
You would be utterly catatonic. You couldn't even get out of bed. Pure moral consistency in a world overflowing with suffering just leads to total paralysis.
Yeah.
So the human brain evolved to filter out distant suffering, to compartmentalize so that we can actually function day to day.
I hear that, but I have to push back a little here. Framing self-deception as a necessary survival mechanism sounds dangerously close to just giving humanity a biological permission slip to be terrible.
I can see why it sounds like that.
The sources mention evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers, who theorized that we evolved to deceive ourselves because an inconsistent human who genuinely thinks they are highly moral is much better at persuading and deceiving other people.
All right, Trivers' theory.
Yeah. If our brains are literally wired to lie to ourselves just so we can win social games and outcompete others, doesn't that just mean being an oblivious sociopath is an evolutionary advantage?
It's a completely valid discomfort. Trivers' theory is unsettling. But the nuance here is that it's not about being a calculating sociopath who consciously lies.
Okay, how so?
Well, sociopaths actually have to expend cognitive energy keeping their lies straight. Trivers argues that the most effective deceiver is the one who genuinely believes their own righteous narrative.
Oh, I see.
If you hide the truth from your own conscious mind, your body language, your tone, your conviction, all of it screams authenticity. You become a far more persuasive advocate for your tribe.
That makes sense.
However, acknowledging this biological tendency isn't a permission slip, because while some cognitive filtering is natural, much of the inconsistency we live with isn't just a biological limit. It is actively, artificially manufactured. We are dealing with engineered ignorance.
Oh, and here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The text moves beyond biology and argues that our blind spots are supported by highly profitable systems. It's not just our brains dropping the ball, it's entire industries intentionally hiding the ball from us.
Exactly. Look at the physical architecture of the factory farming industry. It relies heavily on spatial distancing and incredibly opaque supply chains.
Right.
The mechanism of spatial distancing means physically removing the violence from the consumer's daily geography. You never see a slaughterhouse next to a supermarket. And the supply chain is intentionally labyrinthine. You buy a neatly packaged, sterile rectangle of protein wrapped in plastic. The system is engineered to sever the cognitive link between the living animal and the product, making your motivated ignorance effortless.
It's basically done for you.
Yeah.
And it applies to ideological institutions too, right? Like churches, political parties, social movements.
Absolutely.
The text argues they actually benefit from low-cost membership. If an institution audited your life and truly demanded 100% behavioral consistency with its stated ideals, the pews would be empty by next week.
Oh, entirely empty.
The political rallies would have 0 attendees. These institutions have to structurally tolerate massive amounts of inconsistency just to survive and maintain their power base.
Which brings us to the concept of myth as infrastructure. We tend to think of our beliefs as mere intellectual truth claims held in our heads, like, a math equation.
Right, like 2 + 2 = 4.
Exactly. But the text argues beliefs are the actual social scaffolding of our lives. They dictate who your friends are, who you marry, where you spend your weekends, and your fundamental sense of belonging.
That completely reframes why people stay in groups long after they stop believing the core message.
Right.
Someone might experience the total collapse of their intellectual belief in a religious doctrine or secular ideology like nationalism. They know the facts don't add up anymore, but they don't leave.
Because you don't leave a belief system when the intellectual case collapses. You leave when the social cost of leaving becomes bearable.
Wow.
If leaving means losing your community, your family, and your identity, you will compartmentalize the intellectual doubt indefinitely.
Because you are protecting your protagonisthood.
Yes.
We are all the heroes of our own ongoing autobiography. Our brains act like incredibly ruthless film editors. The second a scene happens that makes us look like the villain, or even just a massive hypocrite, the editor leaves it on the cutting room floor.
That's the perfect way to put it.
Confronting our own moral inconsistency isn't processed by the brain as a simple factual correction. It is processed as a violent threat to our identity.
Yeah.
It threatens the entire storyline we've built about being a good person.
And that fierce protection of our narrative identity sets up what might be, well, the most challenging part of the source material.
Oh, the inverse Good Samaritan.
Yes. The text contrasts the traditional story of the Good Samaritan with a concept it calls the inverse Good Samaritan.
To understand the inverse, we have to look at the mechanics of the original parable.
Right.
The traditional Good Samaritan is fundamentally a story about crossing a boundary outward. You are walking along, you see a suffering stranger outside your group,
Mm-hmm.
and the moral test is whether you cross the road to help them. If you fail, it's a failure of a mission. You just keep walking.
Right. So the mechanism there is still rooted in maintaining your own agency. You choose to act or not act.
Exactly.
But the inverse Good Samaritan is the exact opposite movement. It is receiving testimony from someone who was harmed by your group.
Right.
The boundary crossing isn't yours to make anymore. The suffering has already arrived at your doorstep. The wound is in the room.
And the psychological asymmetry between these two scenarios is staggering.
So standing still and just listening to someone say, "Your people hurt me," is actually psychologically harder than crossing the street to help a stranger.
It really is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, in the traditional story, if you ignore the stranger, you can protect your protagonisthood by pleading ignorance.
Like, "Oh, I was in a rush. I didn't see them."
Right. But when testimony arrives from someone your tribe actively harmed, receiving that testimony feels like an attack on your identity.
Because it feels like disloyalty.
Exactly. To even listen to the testimony of the harmed outgroup member feels like a betrayal of your in-group. Empathy, in that specific moment, feels like a threat to your tribe's survival. Wow. Your brain's ruthless film editor kicks into overdrive because accepting the testimony means accepting that your tribe, and by extension, you might be the villain in someone else's story.
That reframes everything about how we argue on the internet or, in politics. It's not a debate about facts. It's a collision of survival instincts.
Completely.
Our immediate reaction to hearing your group caused harm is almost never empathy. It's the instant deployment of defensive counter-narratives. We say, "You're exaggerating the harm," or "That's not historically accurate."
We're the classic, well, what about the terrible things your people did to us?
Right. We treat their pain as a direct threat to our protagonist's storyline that must be neutralized.
Culturally, we are deeply unprepared for this collision. Most religious and cultural traditions have robust, celebrated sacred narratives teaching outward generosity.
True.
We have a million stories about feeding the poor or helping the stranger, but almost none of our dominant institutions have sacred narratives for inward accountability. It is structurally far easier to institutionalize the outward movement of charity than the inward movement of reckoning.
Okay, so if our evolutionary biology, our psychological film editors, and our massive social institutions are all actively working in tandem to maintain these blind spots, how does a person even begin to push back?
Well, the sources emphasize that we shouldn't just throw our hands up in despair, but they also warn against a very specific trap.
What trap is that?
The trap of the self-aware hypocrite.
Oh, man.
Yeah. The text cautions against the danger of meta-awareness. When people learn about psychological concepts like moral compartmentalization or the inverse Good Samaritan, they often get incredibly fluent at analyzing their own inconsistencies.
Right.
The danger is that analyzing the gap becomes a substitute for closing it.
So we basically intellectualize our hypocrisy. We say, "Oh, yes, I clearly see the dissonance between my environmental values and my consumption habits. Isn't human psychology fascinating?"
Exactly. And then you stop there.
The intellectual clarity gets mistaken for actual moral progress. We think that observing the machinery is the same thing as dismantling it.
And dismantling it is harder today than at any point in human history because of algorithmic attention.
How so?
Historically, ignorance was largely geographical and structural. A farmer in the 18th century simply didn't know about a famine on the other side of the planet. Their empathy budget wasn't overdrawn because their data input was local.
Right.
Today, you carry the totality of global suffering in your pocket. The volume is unprecedented, which means your ignorance is no longer a geographical accident. It is an algorithmically curated choice you make 1,000 times a day as you scroll.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this? How do you practically operate on a random Tuesday morning knowing all of this?
Well, the sources outline 4 incredibly grounded steps that don't require you to be a flawless saint.
Oh, good.
The first step is to pick your battleground. You cannot fix everything. If you try, your empathy budget will collapse and you will freeze.
Right.
Choose one specific domain where the harm is real and you actually have personal agency. It could be your food choices, your attention habits, or your local community involvement. Just pick one domain to start.
That feels manageable. And the second step is to replace guilt with contact, right?
Yes, guilt is a paralyzing emotion. It makes you shut down and look away. Contact keeps you present.
So the directive here isn't to binge watch 10 horrific documentaries on factory farming or climate change until you are totally numb.
No, definitely not. It's to watch one documentary, read one detailed first-hand account, seek undeniable reality,
Yeah.
let it land in your consciousness, and just sit with it without looking away.
And the third step is practicing that inverse Good Samaritan movement we talked about.
Exactly. When someone criticizes your group or points out a harm that threatens your narrative, train yourself to pause the film editor.
Don't respond immediately with a counter-narrative.
Right. Ask yourself one simple question. What part of this criticism might actually be true? Say less than you want to. Just practice holding the intense discomfort of the testimony without fighting it.
Wow, that is tough, but so necessary. And the final step is to shrink one gap. Make one small, tangible change in your life that actually costs you something.
Right. Eat a little less meat. Skip a discretionary flight. Change where you invest your money.
But the crucial mechanism here is to do it without using it as moral licensing.
Yes, that is key. Don't let your brain say, well, I skipped a flight, therefore I am a perfectly ethical person who has redeemed my carbon footprint. You simply made a choice to narrow a gap. You didn't erase it.
Which brings us to the core shift the sources are advocating for. We need to redefine integrity itself. We've been operating under the assumption that a good person is a perfectly consistent person.
Right, but the text makes it clear that perfect consistency is a biological and sociological impossibility.
Yeah,
A good person isn't perfectly consistent. A good person is someone who simply refuses to hide from their inconsistencies. It is a shift from managing our moral gaps defensively, using euphemisms and algorithms to hide them, to taking responsibility for them honestly.
it's about the willingness to be seen min-contradiction. The source text actually includes this beautiful poem called Don't Look Away.
I love that poem.
Yeah, it suggests that maybe integrity isn't a polished, seamless life where every action aligns perfectly with every value. Maybe true integrity is just a willingness to hold the fracture without immediately pretending it's whole. It's choosing once in a while to just not look away from the messy reality of who we actually are.
When we adopt that definition of integrity, it completely reframes how we view ourselves. It lowers the defensive walls.
Right.
And just as importantly, it expands the amount of grace we are able to extend to others who are also struggling to navigate this incredibly messy, inconsistent human condition.
As you step away from this deep dive, we really hope this framework gives you a new lens for looking at the world and, at your own reflection. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to ponder on your own. Think back to that fragmented mirror we talked about at the very beginning. If our ancestors managed their moral inconsistencies by simply not having access to global information, and we manage ours today by algorithmically filtering out the overwhelming noise, what happens to the next generation?
That's a great question.
When AI and spatial computing make it literally impossible to hide from any of our contradictions in real time, completely stripping away our motivated ignorance, will it force us to finally achieve perfect integrity, or will it completely break our psychological ability to function?